Good morning. We're going to get started. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 160, 170, 160, 171, 160, 172, and resolution number 160, 180. Mr. Stitt, please read the title of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 160-170, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2017 through 2022 inclusive. Bill number 160-171, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2017 capital budget. Bill number 160-172, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2017. Resolution number 160-180, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2017 through 2021 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2016, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2017, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2017 through fiscal 2022. Today we will hear testimony from the following city departments: the Mayor's Office of Planning and Development, Mayor's Office, Housing and Community Development, City Planning Commission, and Mural Arts. And then we will have License Inspection and Office of Information Technology. Mr. Stitt, first person to testify is?
And Fadullon.
All right. Can we have, if it's okay with you all, to bring whoever's going to testify for the first 3 agencies? Might as well have them all up. I'm just trying to facilitate activity.
Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. My name is Ann Fadullon, and I'm Director of the Office of Planning and Development. Joining me today, I have the Deputy Director of the Office of Housing. This has a slightly different name now, but anyway, Melissa Long, and then also the Executive Director of the Planning Commission, Gary Jastrzab. And I also have other members of my staff here, Nick Scafidi, who is Interim Director of the Land Bank, and John Farnham, who is Executive Director of the Historic Commission, as well as my Deputy Director, Kathy Calfano. The Office of Planning and Development's mission is to coordinate the city's planning, zoning, housing, and development functions to promote the economic health of all of Philadelphia's neighborhoods and the city as a whole. To that end, I'm pleased to provide testimony on our fiscal year 17 operating budget and our overall goals for 2017. Within the portfolio of planning and development are the city's various planning and redevelopment entities, including Housing and Community Development, the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and the Land Bank. We also encompass the Planning Commission, the Historic Commission, and the Art Commission, and also the Office of Development Services. Combined, these entities employ 195 full-time staff and 15 executive-level staff. We represent a diverse city workforce. Of our full-time employees, 57% are female and 43% are male. 46% are African American, 39% are white, 12% are Hispanic, and 3% are Asian. The combined executive team, which we're still in the process of assembling, is currently 71% white and 29% African American, 65% male, and 35% female. Currently, the office itself only has 3 staff positions for fiscal year 17, the Director of Planning Development, which is my role, the Deputy Director of Planning and Development, which is filled by Kathy Calfano, and the Deputy Director of Development Services, which is John Monlack. We already talked about our mission. Our objectives as a whole in fiscal year 17 are to develop an organizational chart for the creation of the Department of Planning and Development, which is to launch in fiscal year 18. Right now, per executive order, we are an office under the mayor, and in fiscal year 18, we will become our full department. To complete the 5-year strategic housing and community development plan, ensuring public investment in all market sectors, and responding to current conditions and continue to increase coordination between and approvals by city agencies for private development projects, and to continue to increase the functionality of the land bank to streamline the assembly and disposition of blighted properties, and to provide more opportunities for affordable housing by working with advocates to extend the reach of the Housing Trust Fund and the projects it supports. So essentially, our two major goals in fiscal year 17 are to come up with the overall organizational structure for this new department and to develop a strategic plan around how we invest our resources. Excuse me. The proposed strategic plan will set forth development strategies that will address barriers to improving neighborhood and residential health, creating additional housing opportunities for households at various income levels, and improve market stability. Working with City Council, leadership from the existing departments, and through a collaborative process of engaging diverse constituent groups, we seek to produce a blueprint that defines core values, assesses existing conditions, applies best practices, evaluates current programs, and garners public and philanthropic support for new initiatives. As required by the Charter and Council, the planning process has an aggressive timeline. We look to ensure that the information we get from the strategic planning process helps inform how we plan for expending housing and planning resources in the fiscal year 18 budget. While we engage in this planning process, our offices will continue to engage, improve, and expand services to our residents and the development community. In fiscal year 17, our development services team will continue to increase public awareness of our services and respond to development entities seeking coordinated reviews by city departments. We anticipate facilitating public approvals of 6 to 12 large-scale projects, conducting 25 developer service meetings, and participating in 4 public education sessions to associations including the Building Industry Association and the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. Although not all projects require development meetings, we anticipate that a developer's checklist can help smaller and newer development entities navigate through public approvals. Our goal is to produce an updated checklist guidebook before the end of the calendar year. Last, we recognize that with the city of this age and size, some of our processes are antiquated or not operational, and we will work in fiscal year 17 on cross-department initiatives to improve government efficiency related to spurring and sustaining development. In the fall of 2013, Philadelphia launched the creation of the land bank. Since that time, it has achieved numerous milestones that improve access to blighted properties for redevelopment purposes. Namely, it is nearing completion of an effort to research and correct the legal descriptions of more than 6,000 deeds. Approximately 1,800 properties have moved or are moving from other public land agencies into the land bank inventory, and another 500 properties are expected to do so by the end of fiscal year 16. The land bank is also starting to acquire vacant tax delinquent properties at tax foreclosure sale. We anticipate acquiring 60 to 70 parcels through tax foreclosures in the next 6 months. While we note our accomplishments, we also recognize that our processing of expressions of interest has been slow. Our goal is to clear the current backlog by July 1, 2016, and improve the business processes to increase response times. Lastly, the land bank has added more features to its website regarding Philadelphia's real estate market and its property inventory, and will continue to streamline the express interest submission process. In fiscal year 17, the land bank will align its goals to the goals of the Department of Planning and Development strategic plan, ensuring that acquisition and disposition access support the need for affordable, workforce, and market rate housing in Philadelphia, as well as that all those activities support the other activities that are going on within the city, such as commercial corridor development, capital programs, and transportation access. Also included in our testimony is kind of an outline diagram of how the department is currently configured today, which is we really oversee 3 main functions: planning and zoning, development services, and housing and community development.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys want to just go through all of the testimony? Because it's going to overlap. And there's a reason why I asked you all up here, because I want to get a sense of what it's going to be like once we officially launch the new
Sure,
office.
I think we can do that, and I appreciate that, because that's exactly what we're doing and why we're
That's the
here.
whole point of doing the charter change, so we can have that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Good morning, Council President
Morning.
Clark and other members of City Council. I'm Melissa Long, Deputy Director of the Office of Housing and Community Development, and I'm here today to present testimony on OHCD's proposed general fund operating budget for fiscal year 2017. The proposed combined operating budget under the Community Development Block Grant Fund, Grants Revenue, Housing Trust Fund will be presented in the spring or early June to the Finance Committee in its hearing on the Consolidated Plan Ordinance. That hearing will authorize the submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development of the Consolidated Plan, which includes the budget for the Community Development Block Grant and other housing programs for fiscal year 2017. The mission of the Office of Housing and Community Development is to strategically align housing and community development resources and programs to prevent homelessness by keeping people in their homes, increase affordable housing by producing new affordable housing units, strengthen communities by eliminating blight and promoting neighborhood planning, and creating jobs by attracting and retaining businesses. The year 42 allocation of CDBG home and HOPWA from HUD to OHCD is $54 million. These resources will support programs consistent with the city's housing and community development priorities and the priorities of the Office of Planning and Development to serve low and moderate income individuals and families to revitalize neighborhoods. One of the biggest challenges facing the city remains a significant reduction of more than $45 million in federal and state resources over the last 14 years, making general fund support critical to meeting the city's priorities. The proposed FY2017 general fund budget allocates $2.865 million to the Office of Housing and Community Development. This funding includes $2.3 million to support the vacant land stabilization and maintenance activities of the Philadelphia Land Care Program, $345,000 to support the North Central Choice neighborhood, and $130,000 to support the Settlement Grant and Tangled Title programs. In FY 2017, a total of $2.39 million will support the Philadelphia Land Care Program through the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society to stabilize and maintain nearly 9,000 of the 40,000 vacant lots in Philadelphia. This award-winning national best practice model creates jobs, raises property values, reduces crime, and promotes new development. In FY 2016, PHS launched the Re-Entry Initiative. This innovative program provides citizens returning from incarceration with marketable skills and an opportunity to work for landscape services contractors. To date, a total of 27 returning citizens have been trained, hired, and supported through this program, and an additional 2,000 lots are now cleaned and maintained as green community assets. In addition, a total of $30,000 in FY 2017 will support average grants of $1,100 per household for low-income homeowners to obtain a clear title to their home. A total of $100,000 for settlement assistance grants of up to $500 per household will assist income-eligible home buyers to pay for closing costs. We will return to City Council next month to present the complete FY 2017 proposed budget as part of the Consolidated Plan hearing. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Gary Jastrzab, Executive Director of the City Planning Commission, and joining me over on this side is Deputy Executive Director Eleanor Sharp. I'm happy to provide testimony on the City Planning Commission's fiscal 2017 operating budget. The mission of the City Planning Commission is to guide the overall growth and development of the city through sound planning principles and policies. The Home Rule Charter directs the Commission to prepare and update a comprehensive plan to guide the city's physical development, to prepare an annual capital program and budget to guide city infrastructure and public facility investments, to prepare proposed zoning ordinances and maps to ensure appropriate development, to administer the regulations concerning the subdivision of land, and to make recommendations on the acquisition and sale of city real estate. The Commission's other responsibilities include administering the zoning code's civic design review and registered community organization processes, and operating the Citizens Planning Institute as the educational training and civic engagement arm of the City Planning Commission. The administration of the Art Commission is also included in the City Planning Commission's budget. Currently, the composition of our staff is 57% male, 43% female, 76% white, 18% African American, and 6% Asian American. We do have 3 bilingual speakers on our staff, a Mandarin Chinese speaker, a Spanish speaker, and a Vietnamese speaker. And in addition, we have an OIT staffer that's assigned to the City Planning Commission who speaks Hindi and Gujarati. Our primary efforts for fiscal year 2017 revolve around 3 programs. The Philadelphia 2035 Comprehensive Plan and their district plans. It's the first citywide comprehensive plan since 1960, intended to align municipal, private, institutional, and civic resources toward common physical development goals. The Commission continues to institutionalize the city's comprehensive planning process so that it's updated and renewed in a continuing cycle going forward. In 2013, the Commission received a National Best Practices Planning Award for this work. And just last month, the American Planning Association, the professional association of urban planners in the United States, conferred its 2016 National Planning Excellence Award for an agency upon the Commission, recognizing our work over the past several years. We're now engaged in a series of 18 district plans addressing land use, zoning, urban design, healthy community, public facility, community schools, and other physical infrastructure issues throughout the city. Each district plan involves extensive civic outreach and public participation. 11 district plans have been adopted since 2012, and 1 more is scheduled for adoption in June. By this time next year, it's anticipated that 15 of the 18 district plans will have been completed, and work on plans 16 and 17 will be underway. Our second major program is the zoning remapping program. Coming out of the district plans are zoning recommendations. 2 types of zoning recommendations are usually proposed: corrective zoning to replace obsolete or outdated zoning, and zoning to advance the plan to achieve future development and neighborhood conservation goals. To date, recommendations have been made to remap 8,250 acres of land, about 1 in every 5 acres in the districts with adopted plans. Of this total, remapping has been completed and is in place for 2,700 acres, about 33%. Another 900 acres, 11%, are in the legislative process, and we're working on the balance of about 4,600 acres, 56%. It's a very labor-intensive and data-intensive process. During fiscal 2017, the Commission expects to propose an additional 1,500 acres of land for remapping. And as you know, the City Planning Commission staff works closely with City Council members and other community stakeholders to prepare all zoning remapping bills. And then our third major program is the Citizens Planning Institute. The CPI was created in 2010 as the Commission's education, training, and civic engagement arm. The CPI helps empower Philadelphians to take a more proactive and informed role in shaping the future of their city through a better understanding of planning, zoning, and the development process. Each spring and fall, the CPI offers educational courses focusing on planning and urban design topics, and we're now beginning our 12th semester with the first class tomorrow evening. And by the close of this fiscal year, the CPI will have graduated 360 citizen planners throughout the city. And with that, we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I want to start out with Ms. Fadullon. First of all, again, congratulations on your new position. We can't wait till the full implementation takes place per the charter change.
Right. I think I have a lot to thank you for.
Yeah, I know. There's some headaches thrown in there every now and then. That's a part of the deal. I felt the same way about this job when I got it, right? I was pretty excited, but then there are some days when you're like, what the heck did I do? Quickly, with respect to that issue about the consolidation, and I know there are some limitations in terms of what you can actually do, what you can actually codify in the structure of your organization. What have you been able to do so far to allow you to facilitate change and put in place a structure in the government that is more user-friendly, I like to say, not only for elected officials, but in particular, user-friendly for the citizens? And then I'd like to follow up that by asking you about the makeup on the chart. I think all the colleagues have charts, and particularly the Division of Development Services, which is one that we kind of created. I want to ask you about, in the interim, what are we doing to utilize? Because that's pretty much the constituent base arm of the government.
So the charter change doesn't fully take effect until July 1st, 2017, which would be essentially fiscal year 18. So we have a year to sort of work through what we want that department to look like. Excuse me. On January 4th, when the mayor was inaugurated, he signed an executive order that created the Office of Planning and Development and allowed us to implement a large portion of the charter, but not everything. So what we've done so far to date is we have that one division that's planning and zoning that incorporates the Historic Planning Commission, the Historic Commission, and the Art Commission. And in fiscal year 18 will also include the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The Zoning Board has not moved over to our department as our division office, our office as of yet, and we plan to take the year to figure out how to do that. That's a little bit tricky. Unlike the other entities contained in this office, the Zoning Board of Adjustment does not have any direct report staff. They share staff with two other boards, so we need to figure out how to kind of figure that out in the budget and also staffing wise, but we also want to take this opportunity to see if we want to put in place different processes around how the zoning board is handled. I'm going to sort of skip over development services because that was a big chunk of your question. And then in housing and community development, the Office of Housing has already been gotten away with, and that's now the Division of Housing and Community Development, but for this year we really have them functioning almost exactly the same way. And that was really in conjunction with the Finance and Budget Office to say it's going to take us a little while to figure out how to meld all this into one department and one budget authority, and so we frankly kind of kicked it down the road for another year. And then we have the Redevelopment Authority, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and the Land Bank that's housed within PHDC. And they're all functioning as they were, but I have to say we've created a kind of senior management staff, and we're all kind of looking at how those organizations work together and in concert with each other, and we're really in the process of forming what I believe to be a very strong team to oversee those agencies and to figure out how we use those dwindling resources that Melissa referred to in as efficient a way as we can, and then also to see if we can go after kind of funds that traditionally we have not taken advantage of, maybe some private capital dollars, some philanthropy dollars, and some other things. We're not content to come here every year and testify that our resources are dwindling. In reference to development services, that was a group that was housed within the Commerce Department. Technically, they are still paid out of either the Managing Director's Office or PIDC stimulus dollars. But again, part of that not part of the executive order, but attached to the executive order, was an MOU that was signed on January 4th by the Director of Commerce that makes that division a direct report to me. And they actually now are on the 13th floor in 1515 Arch Street. So they're on the same floor as we are, and they continue to do the work that they did in support of the Commerce Department as far as business attraction and retention, and how new businesses are coming into the city can help ease their way through the approval process. But now they're much more closely tied to also the development functions within the city, including planning and the housing functions, and we're opening that up to more of our CDC and nonprofit developers, where they access that service when they knew about it, but we're being much more proactive about making that linkage, and then also making sure that more folks know about the opportunities and the assistance that's provided through development services. I'd like to add, in addition, what we're doing is in the next, I want to say, week or so, the Historic Commission will be moving over to our floor of the offices as well. And we're doing our best to kind of get people as consolidated as in one place as we can. We have a dream that someday the housing agencies will be in close proximity to us as well. But right now, we're churning everybody's Fitbits by going back and forth between the various places that we're located.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that process. I mean, at the end of the day, our ability to make our service advantageous to the citizens is what it's all about. So that's why city council's all in one building. I know some of us would like to be in other buildings, but we're good here. See. Quick follow-up to that, to your testimony. One of the things that we talked about, we didn't put it in the charter ordinance. When you talk about developer services, there was some concerns raised, and actually in some quarters, some criticism about us coming off as the developer friendly of an ordinance. And what about the citizens? Because the simple reality is, in a lot of neighborhoods throughout the city, when there's activity taking place, it can be some somewhat negative impacts when the streets get trenched and 7 o'clock in the morning, the trucks are backing up with the beep, 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 and all the things associated with activity. It can create a problem for the residents in those communities, and I can attest to that. Being in the area, there's a lot of stuff going on. I actually talked to people out in the street, and there was some thought that the person could actually call one number as it relates to construction-related activity, as opposed to the person, we actually did, it was a Channel 10 story about this, where the street gets trenched, and the average citizen has no clue, is it water, sewer, PGW, cable, whatever. It shouldn't be the responsibility of the citizen to have to figure out who's responsible for this trench in the street that's been sitting there for 3 months, and every time a car goes over, it's bang, bang. And we were talking about, and I actually promised some people that there will actually be a number where the citizens can call to find out what's going on in my neighborhood. Why are they digging excavating this big lot across the street? Is there going to be development? All of those things. Is there, in your implementation, had you given any thought to that? And I don't know if I had that level of details as it relates to the conversation with you, but that was the belief.
We're in the process of going around and meeting with different departments, streets department, L&I, the water department, and sort of saying, here we are, we're the new Office of Planning and Development. This is what we, these are kind of the resources and things that we have available, and finding out what they have available and how we can work together. And I think as part of that, we can look into figuring out how we could collect the data about different things that are going on in the city, and then house that in one location, and figure out a means to make that easily accessible. Because I have to be honest with you right now, I think if you called somebody, one person in the city, that one person would probably not know every single thing that was going on within the city, because just as you mentioned, there's a lot going on in a lot of different areas. But we can certainly work with our sister departments and figure out how to collect that data, and then figure out a mechanism to make that available in a way that makes sense to the public, so that people know what's going on. I think that's really one of the things that we're striving for is to do a better job of communicating with the communities. And a big part of that we feel is listening to what they have to say and then getting our information out there in as accessible a manner as possible.
Right.
So we can certainly look into
Yeah, that would be
figuring that
helpful,
out.
because we want to be, in the position of facilitating development, but we also want to be in a position where we are responsive to our citizens, because there's
Right.
a lot more of them than there are of developers.
Yeah, and we don't define development just as developers.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had my staff, when I first got elected, President Clark was kind enough to ride through my district with me because he was a premier developer of low and moderate income housing in his district. So I prepared a list of projects that I got ready for the pipeline. And not knowing how long development takes, then Councilman Rizzo got me this pipeline. And he signed it, he said, because you're in line behind about 10 other district council people by way of development. So the reason I brought it out today, and I'm gonna get my colleagues, freshman colleagues to sign it, is that I am finally, President Clark, closing, we're finally, the one project I showed you was the Wynn Ballroom. We just now demolished it and are building the new one. 8 years later. 8 years later. So my hope is that this new office allows things to go through the pipeline a little quicker. And so the planning and codification of all of these departments is, I'm optimistic about. But let me ask a couple of specific questions, particularly first about planning. There is a migration of sorts from low-income, moderate-income people around the city. My question is, where are they going? And if it impacts us in redistricting a couple of years back, it is going to impact us in a different way again. And so I need to know where we are. And it doesn't have to answer now, but by the time you come back, know where these folks are going. So if they're moving from North Philly to Northeast or to Southwest, we need to know that so that we can meet them there almost and accommodate them with the type and price points that they need. That's number one. Number two is that President Clark put together a list of potential developable houses, some 3,000 if I recall, in different parts of the city. That it was 2,000? 2,000. How is that in your, are you incorporating that in your plan? And if so, please respond now.
Right, so I believe, Councilman Jones, you're referring to the Workforce Housing Initiative, which we have been working diligently on. It's been one of our highest priorities since we got into office in January, and I believe we're at a point so my first entree to that was a meeting that I would say there were at least 15 people in, and there was issues with one of the initial projects that had been rolled out. And I think based on that, we sort of made a decision of, let's catch our breath. And before we try to do, 1,500 or 2,000 of these, let's make sure that we have the program that we want to have and get it set up in the appropriate way. So we've spent the last couple months doing exactly that, working very closely with the council president's staff, and we believe we've come up with a mechanism that helps us better assess, kind of along the lines of your first statement, better assess the markets that we're looking to work in to make sure that the workforce housing program is really hitting a market niche that is not being met, and to make sure that that market niche is actually there so that we don't end up with beautiful new properties that we can't sell. And that we can make sure that people can qualify for the mortgages, and that developers are selling them at the prices that are an affordable price and not coming back to us and saying we have to now sell it to people at a higher level of median. And so we've really taken our time to make sure that we're doing the right analysis, and that we're working with the communities, and that we're working with the various council people, and we're about ready to roll out our first RFP in the Francisville community. to put out packages of properties there, and we're going to, hopefully that will be successful in this program that we've designed, and we will then be able to come and move to different districts with, I think we've identified about 7 or 8 areas around the city that we think have very high potential for this program to succeed.
Well, I'm going to need more data and definition of that program, because one person's prosperity is another person's misery. Those people are moving from somewhere going to another place, and us predicting where they are, we can put market rate or price points that they can afford in place for them. And so that planning of that is something I look forward to getting some direction on. The other one is that the Realtors Association had a proposal where there was a type of receivership that they were going to get in a dilapidated property, that we would take that property, put it in the hands of a responsible realtor that would fix it up, and that if that owner wanted to redeem that property, they could come back, pay the arrearages, and get that property back. But in the meantime, that would be a property put back on the rolls in affordable housing. Is that being considered in your planning process?
Right, so I think you're referring to the conservatorship program that has been something that the state came up with and has been in effect for a few years, and a few people have taken advantage of it. We haven't seen anything done at scale, and part of that is we need to work through, there's some title and financing issues that come associated with the conservatorship program, and so I think we'll take a look at that, and again, kind of like we did with workforce housing, let's learn how to walk before we learn how to run, and see if there's a way that we may need to tweak that program in order to scale it up and have it really be as effective as what it was envisioned to be. So yes, we are going to consider, we are at the point where we're going to try to consider as many possible things as we can think of. So the more ideas that you have, send them our way, and we will definitely do the analysis.
So in light of the fact that we're not going to wind up with more CDBG dollars from heaven, we have to use innovative ways to approach the market in non-traditional ways. So that what did you call it?
Conservatorship.
Conservatorship program and the workforce housing program are two at least viable options that we should consider. There's probably the devil's in the details, but that's what I want to know by way of investment, by way of our public dollars, which one is the better way, or both of them to go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. I just wanted to just give my congratulations for the awards that you have won, and I did enjoy our conversation when you stopped by my office, and I think this is a wonderful process. I'm not sure, but the way I understand it, this is a kind of a new process where you are kind of at the hub of the wheel, reaching out to all the different departments. Sometimes our city's like a octopus with tentacles, doing so many different things, but not necessarily knowing what's coming next, who next door is doing things, but your office will kind of coordinate that. It should be more efficient. We should not be doing things and going back and redoing things with this planning. So I really appreciate the planning. I think it's a wonderful thing for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I just have 1 or 2 or 3 quickie questions.
What are my 5 goals?
So I read a study by eConsult back in 2011, and I guess this was the impetus for Councilwoman Sanchez and Council President Clark pushing the land bank. But it said back then that we spend $20 million a year on our vacant properties in Philadelphia. And that's a lot of money every year. But also said that there was only $2 million in potential real estate taxes that we could derive from that $20 million that we spend of real estate taxes. So I'm saying to myself, from an economic standpoint, each year we spend $20 million. The potential revenue for the city is $2 million. It'll take us 10 years to make up 1 year's cost of maintenance. So in that light, I heard you mention some numbers, but roughly today, how many properties are in the land bank? How many properties can we get into the land bank? And how do we get this land bank properties sold much quicker than what we're doing?
Right, so I think those are the things that we're looking at. So right now we have about 1,800 properties in the land bank. We anticipate an additional 500 coming in by the end of this fiscal year. But I think, all testament to the land bank staff. They've really spent the last couple of years trying to get the land bank up, organized, and structured, and now we're really moving in more to that operational phase of the land bank. And so we're really taking a look at now how we can get the primary functions of the land bank to either be you're taking properties in or you're getting properties out, as opposed to that setup function. But that setup function really needs to happen, because as we testified to, we've been in the process of cleaning up the deeds for 6,000 properties. I think one of the big challenges in an older city, in a city that has such severe tangled title issues that we have, is that although we knew we owned these properties, we weren't sure what we owned, and we did not necessarily have clear title to them. So working through that was really important work that the land bank was doing, but now we have to really focus on getting the land in and getting the land back out. And we're really taking a hard look at that and figuring out how we need to structure things going forward so that it's focused on operations as opposed to organization.
How many properties, there's 2,300 in the land bank or going into land bank soon, how many properties do you envision this year will have in the land bank?
I'm sorry, I missed how many this year?
How many properties do you think we'll have in 2016 going into the land bank?
About 2,300.
And if it's costing us $20 million a year, if you and I were in business and it cost us $20 million a year to get $2 million of revenue, we would sell all those properties right now, because it's a bad economic deal for us, terrible. After 5 years, it's going to cost us $100 million to maintain properties that produce $2 million a year. How do we speed up this process? Because it's worth the investment to unload these properties and get them into the hands of taxpayers and get them off our books.
Well, I do think that there is probably a short-term gain to sell off some of them that way, but I also think we want to take a little bit more of a strategic approach and figure out if there's a way to combine them maybe with some other properties that are already in private ownership or other forms of public ownership or tax delinquent, that we could then assemble a larger development parcel. I think we want to take a look at that as well and make sure that we want to, let me just say we're not content with the 2 million or 20 million. We want to see really where we can get to. And then I think also to Councilman Jones' point, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of all the various residents in our communities. And so we are looking at which ones of those should be, really need to be workforce housing and or affordable housing or community gardens. We're really tasked with not just maximizing initial short-term economic gain. We're really charged with long-term economic gain, and we've got a lot of work to do in our communities around that, and to make sure that we are taking care of the existing residents as opposed to bringing new growth and new development into the city.
Are there potentially 40,000 properties that could go into the land bank over the long term?
We believe so. It's been a little bit difficult to get an accurate count, but we think it's in that vicinity. So potentially, but I think honestly that the Revenue and Finance Department would probably hope that some of those folks would show up and start paying their taxes, and they may want to develop them on their own as opposed to necessarily going the land bank route.
And are the statistics still about 8,000 to 10,000 of those are vacant property? Is that the number?
I think vacant in one form or another. So either a vacant structure or a vacant lot. I think that's probably about accurate.
So on those, if we attack those first, we're not affecting anybody really. Those are just empty properties that need to be revitalized.
Right, and so we're taking a look at those. We're going to take a look at those and figure out where they really are and what's around them. So one of the things that we're doing with this strategic plan that we're talking about doing, and this tour that we've been doing to other departments that kind of Councilman O referred to, is we're going to these other departments and saying, we have great planning resources, we have great mapping resources, we have great, really a lot of experience with how to implement things. If any of those services are a benefit to you, please let us know. We want to offer them up. And in return, we'd like all your data. And what we hope to do is develop a plan that shows where are we investing in housing, where do we have properties available, where are we investing in commercial corridors, where are we putting parks, recs, and library money, where are we investing in small businesses or capital programs, and does that make sense? Are we leveraging things to the maximum extent? Are we, is that a way that we can go after larger philanthropic dollars, or is there a larger way we can go after capital dollars to bring that investment in? We're really working on being the planning and implementation arm for the city, as well as for the residents of the city, to make sure that we're getting good economic bang for our buck, but also to make sure that we're doing it in a way that meets needs across the spectrum, as opposed to just picking one target.
What do you think's realistic, timeframe-wise, for us to clean out these properties and eliminate that $20 million payment? Is that a 3-year or a 5-year horizon, or what do you think's the realistic timeframe?
I think it's probably at least a 5-year timeframe. I think like I said, we're really focused on becoming as operational as we can in the land bank realm, but we do want to do it in an intentional way.
Okay.
So
Thank
we're
you
getting
very
there.
much. Okay.
And we're working on it every single day. Some days we move a yard, some days we move back a yard, and some days we move an inch.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Just real quick follow-up on that. There are obviously philosophical issues about, where the land bank does its work, and, issues about gentrification, all those other things come up. But there are two operational issues that, at least from our perspective, needs to be addressed. And one is obviously the staffing issue. And I know you guys are working on it, but it is always a challenge when you talk about staffing with different workforce. And the other thing is the law department. We found that to be the most significant impediment, our inability to get on the same page with law, because ultimately law has to start the sheriff's sale process in terms of how those properties get picked up. So I would like to see, as you move towards official cabinet level position, that you encourage people to put a little more emphasis on getting law to certify those properties in a timely way. And I understand there's this conflict between revenue, but at the end of the day, long term, those properties will ultimately, the councilman said, ultimately be part of the tax base, because as soon as that land is conveyed to an end user, they're immediately going to start paying taxes. So short term, you might lose a little money, but long term, it's clearly going to be an annualized revenue stream coming into the city.
Right, and we're working on that right now. We're trying to get a hold of Revenue Department data and law and sit down and analyze that to say, listen, this is kind of what makes, we understand your perspective, this is our perspective, and understand we're not always at odds, and we're trying to work very cooperatively with these various departments to say we're all in this together, we all want to be good teammates, let's figure out how we do this, that makes the most sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Chair recognizes.
My clock.
You want to start? You want to get your point of information in first, and then start the clock?
Yes.
I tell you, these veteran council members, they know all the tricks, right?
Thank you. Just on that, one of the issues, we were very deliberate in creating the strategic plan to create those buckets of opportunities. And one of the biggest challenges is the Council President Clark mentioned and Councilman Dom is, if revenue has to approve every single one of this, then we're not, that's going to hold us up. So really want to get the administration to agree. Do they or do they not agree with the buckets of opportunities? Create that criteria, because that NASA committee that I call them the NASA committee because nobody knows who they are, who look at these, they do the check off, who've never been to 3rd and Indiana but are going to tell me yes or no about what I'm doing at 3rd and Indiana. We need a better system. Otherwise, there has to be a commitment from revenue. They have to be out of the picture around this and released politically, because I know they need to collect. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck on a property-to-property basis. And that, are we committed to the side lot program? Yes or no? We have 2,000 of them for qualifying, tax-paying resident. Are we committed? That's low-hanging fruit. So what's the time frame for us to move that? Because those are thousands of properties.
Right. So, frankly, we couldn't agree with you more. If you've ever sat in one of those meetings, it's just painful. And to get back to
I don't think they would ever let me into one of those
well, trust me, you really probably don't want to be there. But getting back to Councilman Dom's point, if that's going to be the process, it'll be 100 years. So like I said, in response to that, we are really diligently trying to get a hold of data just for exactly that, side yards. let's parse that data and say we can agree that these 1,000 lots need to be side yards right now, rather than sitting down and saying, what about this lot? Well, what about this lot? And we're trying to, through initial data analysis, figure out what are those low-hanging fruit and agree on that. And we know that there's going to be a pot of these properties that is going to be a hard sell, and we are going to have to sit down and really bargain over them. But that can't be 10,000 properties, right? So let's figure out what are those low-hanging fruit and get them out the door while we figure out what we're going to do with those remaining, whatever number that is.
So when would I know about side lots? Are we committed to them or are we not? We did it in the strategic plan, we outlined them, we identified them, we told people to apply for them.
Yeah, we're committed to side lots. We're committed to executing the strategic plan. And in our next strategic plan, frankly, we're interested in identifying goals and making sure that we hit target goals, as opposed to just saying this is kind of the idea of things. But I'll be honest with you, we got some work to do to get there, and we are working on getting that done. Everybody's not on the same page right now, but we are definitely on a tour to make friends, to get cooperation going, and to get people to understand that we're teammates.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Now you can start my clock.
It actually started about a minute ago.
All right, so let me quickly get through this. Happy to see more general operating fund support to offset some of the work that we're doing. Wanted to ask around the decision. First of all, I'd like OHCD to provide to the chair a listing of all of the OHCD funded positions regardless of where they are parked. We haven't looked at that list for a long time, and I think we need to look at that. Why the decision to put the $2.8 million in general fund to the vacant lot, which is the CDBG approved activity, and why not use it for the activities that we have found to be challenging? And I'll list them for you. Carter cleaning, facade program. What else? Come on, Council President, help me here. Why not put, the commercial fund, mixed development commercial fund that Councilman Jones created several years ago, where we have a backlog because putting that money on the ground is complicated meeting CDBG requirements. I mean, we've talked about this for years. It's sort of like, if we can get some of this money that's free, so here you have a pot of money, why not put it where we've had a challenge in putting it on the ground?
The ongoing maintenance.
Just state your name for the
Oh,
record.
I'm sorry, Melissa Long, Office of Housing. One of the issues with CDBG funding is that ongoing maintenance and repair of vacant lots is not an eligible CDBG expense. Mm-hmm. We do allocate roughly around $350,000 for initial stabilization.
Why not now? We've always put that $2 million towards the land care, and it's come out of CDBG.
No, it's come out of general fund, because at least in the last couple of years since I've been back at OHCD, because HUD is really on us, as the funds dwindle, the monitoring increases, and they are very clear that ongoing maintenance and repair of a vacant lot is not an eligible CDBG expense.
Okay, so that's news to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. But we can use it for initial stabilization, and we do.
Okay, so can we break that down about how many square foot we're doing, like 2 million square feet of land maintenance care right now?
I can get that figure for you in 1 second.
All right. Yeah. So, I'd be interested in looking at that. So that we can really kind of parcel out. Again, very happy to see the administration put general operating money here. Just want to make sure that we're putting it where it's been the hardest to kind of get it on the ground.
Yeah. So
that's an area. Real quickly, before my time rings up, wanted to talk a little bit about the basic systems. I see that there is a reduction. Oh man, now of course I can't find it. Basic systems support.
the basic systems repair?
Yeah, we're saying we're going to get to less people. I can't find it in my, than in the previous fiscal year.
I think those were the figures up through the end of December, and we're on target to reach the same number. aren't we, George?
No, the number's a little lower.
Yeah, we're at 813.
Okay.
Yeah.
As it relates to some of the, in your budget book, there's no details around housing counseling vendors, around any of that. You're just putting these pots. Is there any way we're going to get some of that stuff itemized out?
Yes, we'll provide that when we,
When you do the plan, is that what you're
Exactly.
looking to do? So
Exactly.
you just kind of lumped it all up?
Yeah.
And particularly interested in like our NAC funding and some of the other places where we've seen reductions. Can you delineate for us what choices you're making around what are you reducing down? I'm very concerned about things like CLS and other things where we've seen a reduction.
yes, and I can, I'll definitely be able to delineate the NACs and the housing counseling agencies. One thing that we're facing is that the housing counseling services fall under what HUD calls public service cap, and grantees can only allocate 15% of their annual CDBG entitlement and program income. So as our funding keeps getting reduced, we have another $238,000 reduction in CDBG funding again this year. And if program income goes down, that cap, what we're allowed under that cap, shrinks. So public services include corridor cleaning, education that PHS does to educate low-income communities on farming and access to food, and the big expense under there is housing counseling. So in this past fiscal year, we're now right up against the cap. So while we...
Well, and that's why I think it's important that
Yeah.
you list out for us what are the staffing positions funded, because you're making choices, and some of these things, we're talking about neighborhood stabilization, we're talking about all these things, and I'm seeing your reductions in the areas where we've identified we really should be ramping up. Is there some other decisions we could be making over there around
Sure.
what staffing we're paying with our poverty allocation?
I'm happy to do that. I'll do
Okay.
that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Thank you, Council President. And Ann Fadullon, thank you very much for being here, for visiting our offices. I think it's important. I like what I'm seeing in your leadership very, very, very much. And congratulations on your department's awards.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that it's on the record as well. People know about this. My question has to do with history, the Historical Commission. And I'm a great believer that history and economic development through tourism tie together. And I know the department doesn't use up a lot of funds, but on the other hand, the work they do is critical. For example, I know at least one councilman, one of my colleagues, or maybe others that know this, but the oldest continuously used bridge in all of North America is in the city of Philadelphia. People come here from around the world to study it. It's important. My question to you is, how critical is the Historical Commission's digitizing of their files? I have a few questions that will all tie in, and please answer at the end. I worry that it is a small amount, but how long should we wait to have this program go forward? Could we lose some of our history by not preserving these files? And I don't want future generations to say, hey, why didn't they spend all this money on many other projects? Of course, they're all important, but so very little to preserve these very precious documents.
I'm going to ask that John Farnham, the Executive Director of the Historic Commission, come up to answer that question, because he's probably able to provide much more detail than I am at this point.
Good morning, Council President
Morning.
and Council members. I am John Farnham, the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Historical Commission. I'm wondering if you could repeat your
Yeah,
question.
it's a series of questions based really on economic development and history. How critical is it for the Historical Commission to digitize their files? I worry that a small amount, but how long, it is a small amount in the scope of things, but how long should we wait to do this? could we lose some of our history by not preserving these files? And I'm concerned about future generations saying, hey, you spent billions of dollars, almost $4 billion each year, but why didn't you spend such a small amount to preserve these very precious records? Because once they're gone, they're gone.
Absolutely. Our concern, let's say our momentary concern with those records is that they've grown so large physically that it's difficult to store them. And as we move from City Hall over to 1515 Arch Street, we're keenly aware of the constraints that we'll face in moving those records. And you're absolutely right that a catastrophic event, a fire or some other event, could destroy records that are to the Historical Commission and to Philadelphians priceless.
Well, I guess my question to you in a nutshell is, do you have a sense of how much money is involved in that? And is that in the budget? And if not, can we put it in?
It is not currently in the proposed budget. The proposed budget does not fund the digitization project that the Historical Commission has proposed. The cost to do that varies depending on the extent of the digitization, but it is in the range of $150,000 to $225,000.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That concludes my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Good morning. I know, look, there's always talk every year coming in about 10-year tax abatement, how that's projected, whether it's something we should expand, something that should be phased in or phased out. I know we have a bill coming up now with a 20-year abatement option for affordable housing. And when we have those options or subsidies for developers, we also look at it for affordable housing. The ideas have been floated out there for development fees to maybe add money to the Housing Trust Fund that would be charged to new development and then given to the city for affordable housing. Is that something that you guys would support?
So I think we want to see the details of that, but I think those are all things that we're willing to entertain. We do believe that's important to work with City Council and the advocates as the administration to figure out how we get more dollars into affordable housing, given that we're getting less and less money from the federal government and state government and other sort of traditional sources. So we'd be very interested in looking at any of those types of things and doing an analysis of, balancing economic growth with what is needed for affordable housing. But I think we are very much aware that affordable housing is needed to produce economic growth as well. So we're very interested in working and looking at various ideas about how to grow the Housing Trust Fund.
Of the subsidies or the advantages of the abatement and things like that, maybe we could work with those developers that are coming in here and have some sort of fee associated with that would then therefore go into the Housing Trust Fund to help promote the affordable housing. So I think that's an option that is, a possibility. Also, as we mentioned about the land bank and the selling of properties, I'm very big advocate of selling properties. We did an auction last summer. But I also think, we should make sure we don't sell them in a way that other people are out there land banking and holding on to them. I think a developer's agreement is something that's necessary when we sell our properties. And then making sure that we just don't have other people out there. We know we don't do a good job with them. And I don't think we need other people out there holding on to them and not doing a good job with them also. But wasn't part of the land bank also supposed to be able to access privately owned properties and be able to foreclose on them? Is that something that is going to happen?
Right. So one of the powers that the state legislation provided was the ability for the city to go after certain properties, kind of step in front of the sheriff sale process a little bit, if you will, by going after privately owned tax delinquent properties as long as they were vacant. Right. We don't want to necessarily go after occupied ones, but vacant ones that were strategic as far as maybe I think one of the impetuses behind the land bank was that you go in and you see 10 vacant lots when you drive by, but you realize 2 of them are owned by PHDC and 1 is owned by the redevelopment authority and 2 are city-owned, and right smack in the dab middle are, private ones that happen to be tax delinquent, and how can we assemble those? So again, we're looking at that. We have our first test case of that acquisition tool coming up in May, to acquire a few properties in Brewerytown to see how that works. So we're in the process of doing a little pilot to make sure we know how it works, that we get all the kinks out, and then I think we're going to look at, again, tied into the strategic planning we're doing, how we can strategically identify additional properties we can go after that hopefully turn that $2 million that Councilman Dom was referring to into a larger amount of dollars, because we're combining it for a larger redevelopment parcel, or we can expand opportunities for workforce housing and affordable housing because we're acquiring these projects and properties in a strategic means.
Because it's hard to do affordable housing as infills separately on separate lots because of the cost associated with that.
Right, it's the cost and how you qualify for tax credits through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. They're not that big of fans of scattered site. It's hard to manage a scattered site deal. It's more expensive. I think there's a lot of things that if we can combine parcels and get development more at a scale, that there's a lot of benefits to that.
And I know some things we have run into problems with the conservatorship is sometimes, there's back taxes, interest and penalties associated, and we have to work through revenue case by case on each of those. That takes a really long time. Is that the same process that's going to happen now on your test model with the privately owned properties in the land bank when they owe a lot of back taxes and or interest and penalties?
Right. So the land bank has some ability to kind of clear those liens in a way that conservatorship doesn't. Okay. But again, honestly, we don't know what all the issues are, which is why we're going through this test case, so that hopefully some of those will be great if nothing came up, but I don't think we're that naive or optimistic. So we're hoping that some of these issues come up so we can work through it on this kind of initial pilot or maybe a couple pilot packages and figure that out, and then again, determine how we can scale it up in a way that really starts to make sense.
And when a property is put into the land bank, say if it was part of VPRC or PRA, once that land bank starts the process of selling it, does it have to go back through VPRC or PRA, or does it just sell through the land bank directly?
So it does have to go through, it has to go through VPRC, and then it has to come through City Council. It basically has 3 kind of approval triggers, Land Bank Board, VPRC, and City Council.
Okay, so you still have to go through that extra hoop. All right, we'll come back. On the part of the 2035 plan, as we're going through and remapping the city of Philadelphia, we have done that in certain parts of the city already and actively doing it. It's a long process. It takes time. It's a lot of involvement with the community. Do you see a possibility of going back into some of our areas that were already done to be able to go back and modify again? Or are we going to wait till they're all done first before we go back and try to fix them?
No, I think it's a iterative process. So I would not rule out the possibility of going back and rezoning something that may have been remapped 3 or 4 years ago as conditions changed. I mean, that's happened in a few cases already. It's kind of a never-ending work in progress, both the code and the remapping.
And that's part of the issue, because of the remapping, and then we have the zoning code that supposedly codifies that in there. Some of the loopholes that developers found within our zoning designations is similarly the CMX3 one, where the single-family homes, and I know we're still getting pushback on that new bill. If we see that and we go forward, the other thing that I'm really interested in is we have industrial zone properties, and we get a variance for residential use. They no longer have to abide by the residential use policy. They can go and they build 100% lot size, 55 foot high, they're front loading garages. And I think that we need to come up with a way that if we do allow a variance for a residential use on an industrial property, they then have to go to the closest residential zoned area and abide by those guidelines. And we have to put them some protection, because what happens is once they get that, they're building these single-family homes that have no correlation to the surrounding community, you know, and they take away the parking off the street from the front-loading garages, and we have no recourse. So hopefully we could work with you guys to do that.
We can certainly work with you on that, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning,
Morning.
and welcome to the budget process here.
Thank you so much.
I got a question about the as the Planning Commission, or the Division of Planning and Zoning, prepares for the capital budget. How does that work, and how does that prioritize in our capital program submitted by the mayor and the Office of Capital Budget? And does it take in consideration the 2,000 affordable houses the council president launched a year and a half ago, as well as the potential one-line pre-K and community schools and other kind of developments moving forward?
Well, of course, the capital program and budget establishes a plan and an appropriation for the spending of public resources on city-owned property. So most of the capital facilities that you'll see in the program and budget are things like parks, recreation centers, libraries, police and fire stations, things of that nature, not necessarily developments that are developed privately. The way the process works is that the commission works very closely with the Office of, with the Finance Department, Office of Budget and Program Evaluation, and other city operating departments beginning in late summer, early fall, to begin to put out a call for capital projects. Typically in November, December, all of those individual departmental requests are reviewed and evaluated, and then in the early part of the year, the commission itself actually votes to recommend a capital program and budget to the mayor. So it's a very collaborative process within the administration, presented to you for your review and consideration.
Okay, that's putting together, recommendations for the capital budget, and capital budget is pretty large and has a backlog. Where does the priority, and is the priority some of the things that we're discussing now? Again, I want to repeat, 2,000 houses, or 2,000 affordable housing, but possibly pre-K and community schools, land bank. Is all of that recommended in a priority, in order of priority, or is it just recommended to be, as a recommendation for the capital budget? Each of the
individual departments, as they prepare their requests and as it goes through the evaluation process by the administration, prioritizes their projects. So those reflect the needs of the city as interpreted by the individual departments: Parks and Recreation, libraries, police and fire, and so forth. In terms of how the capital program relates to the comprehensive plan, as we go through these district plans and begin to evaluate the condition of sites in each of those districts, those facilities and the conditions of those facilities and the needs of the community, kind of as expressed through our civic outreach process, are all considered to develop those priorities. So, for example, one thing that that you approved for funding last year was the use of some capital program funds for an evaluation of public safety facilities throughout the city. That project is being managed by the Department of Public Property, and it's just beginning. I think an RFP is out on the street now to do that evaluation. That study will bring back a whole series of recommendations, short-term, medium-term, long-term recommendations for how we can most effectively invest our capital funds in those public safety facilities. Various other departments have gone through a similar kind of process. But they are for public facilities, not necessarily for privately developed or school district facilities.
Okay. And the question, I guess, would be for you, the departments, how are the departments to report to you involved in the proposal for some of the new programs, initiatives, Mayor, with pre-K and community schools?
So, as I mentioned before, we are out as a department we spent, let's say, the first month or two figuring out what resources we had within our department, and now we're going around and revealing those, if you will, or explaining those resources to other entities in the city. And so I think a couple ways that we will likely to be tied into community schools and pre-K is if there's an investment made in a community school, what kind of other investments are already going on in that neighborhood? Are we leveraging the other investments that the city is making? For example, is there affordable housing there? Are we working on a commercial corridor? Are we making other capital investments in our parks or our libraries or our police and fire stations there? And then also we are tying in data we've gotten from the reinvestment fund, the market value analysis, and finding out what's really going on with the markets around there and tying it into the community engagement work that the Planning Commission is doing. So we're going to take that planning kind of holistic look at community school and pre-K investment, and then we're also going to add on top our now implementation functions that we're tying in to say, this is what's going to be needed implementation-wise in order to put these facilities in this school, or in order to put a pre-K facility into this development. So those are the two major resources. We're actually kind of three major resources we're bringing is sort of some overall planning, our ability to really map and analyze data, and then how do you implement something and get it done.
Are you involved in this in the site selection?
We have not been as of yet.
Okay, and let me just follow up to this question. When you talk about consolidating services and co-locating services like community schools as a model, is the reuse of vacant facilities being considered? And if it's a reuse, are we creating vacant buildings elsewhere because we're relocating?
Right, and honestly, I'm not sure. I would hope that we are potentially considering reuse of vacant buildings, and I'm hopefully that we would be considering in such a way that wouldn't create other vacant facilities, and that we're thinking holistically about it.
All right, and that's where there's no market demand. I would imagine that's where the reuse would go. So if you're going to have a site selection where there's no market demand, you're going to be vacating elsewhere.
Right, and so I think we have to keep an eye on that, and I really think as, again, part of the strategic planning process that we're going to undergo is to analyze, what are the factors that are resulting in a community having limited market demand, and are there things that we can affect in that community that may change the scenario for them?
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Councilman. A couple of quick questions. All right, call on Councilman Jones. Well, you know what? There are new members teed up here. All right. Recognize them before I come back on my second round. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to each of you. And I think you've been off to a great start, and Melissa, looking forward to talking with you because we will, Melissa, be talking a whole lot. Let me start with the issue that is of grave importance to me, and I've had these conversations with some of my colleagues. Issue of affordable housing, extremely important in the city of Philadelphia, but when you look at some council districts that are landlocked, like the 9th, the issue of preservation is at the top of the list. You know, when we would talk about demolition, when I was a staffer in this office in the Logan area, we would talk about sort of the sawtooth effect. You had two stable properties, and then right in the middle of two stable properties, you had a property that needed to be demolished. Well, we're seeing just the opposite effect now in neighborhoods that you immediately will look at and think are sort of solid and stabilized, but they need assistance with preservation, from a basic paint up, a fix up, the repair of steps. Tell me, when we look at all of the data, you know, that suggests that affordable housing is needed, is there the same drive and or commitment to home preservation? And if so, what are some of the action plans that we see ourselves working to enact over the next year?
Right, so home preservation is important almost anywhere, but I think really in Philadelphia there's a real strong need for this. You know, we're an older city. We have a large row house community, which actually isn't a bad unit type for affordable housing. It's actually a pretty efficient unit type, but we've got a huge percent of our row houses that have been built, you know, over 50 years ago, and combine that with our high poverty level, and there's a lot of deferred maintenance out there. And we really need to pay attention to that, because just as you said, you know, one thing starts to go and it really has a domino effect. And we've also, I think, realized that preservation can be much more efficient use of our dollars than new production at times, although new production can be an impetus for other economic development. And so we've kind of got to keep our eye on both those things. But we realize that we have too long of a waiting list for basic system repair, and we're not hitting as many folks as we need to be. I have to say, my hat really goes off to the staff of the basic system repair program, because they have the very hard job of, once they show up in a person's house, if their house does not qualify or they're over limit, you know, they're on the front lines and they have to say no. And that is just a really horrendous position to find yourself in. And in spite of being in that position, they continue to come in every day and do their job. So I think that needs to be recognized. That being said, again, we're not content to just come and say, we're not getting as many state funds as we used to get, or we're not getting as many federal funds. So in particular, Kathy Califano, the deputy director, is really going out and utilizing her foundation relationships and figuring out how we can get the philanthropic community more involved, and how we can take the dollars we get and leverage other types of resources, and really going out and telling the Philadelphia story in a compelling way, to say not only does it affect, you know, property values around there, but if you don't have a place to live, you're not doing as well in school. If you're not in a maintained home, you know, you're subject to more health issues, and how we can kind of tie all these community welfare and well-being issues to how important it is to have somebody in a quality home. So we're really working on that.
Let me just sort of add for the record here, and I think you really sort of hit a nerve when you talked about the staff and going out. They're going out to conduct an assessment, a needs-based assessment on a property, and then you learn that the homeowner is 50% you know, over the limit in terms of income, and he or she doesn't qualify. That is the challenge of many residents, and who are what I consider to be house poor, living in a stable community, but unfortunately don't have the excess revenue to make the investments they need to in repairs. And slowly but surely, we begin to see the housing stock crumble, and what was once a stable community now turns into a blighted area, right? Because, you know, this neighborhood, zip code, for example, 19150, you know, they don't need anything there because it's physically perceived as being an area that is stable and solid. But a lot of retirees on fixed incomes now, only receiving a portion of the salary that they did when they worked, Social Security, not enough to make those kind of investments. And so as we're building our strategies to think about where and how the city determines that it will invest its scarce resources, I would ask that we keep those constituencies, and that's not just in the 9th. I can think about my colleagues who represent other districts, and we all have those kind of pockets. And it's almost as if they're being penalized or not able to get resources, you know, again, because they make a nickel, quarter, or 50 cent above what the guidelines are. So I just ask that we take that into consideration.
Right, and that's exactly why we're trying to investigate other types of resources that might not have as many of the constraints, or may have different types of constraints than what we're currently dealing with.
Good, Council. You good? Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Blackwell.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was meeting with another department who hasn't visited us yet and missed this important discussion. I want to ask, is there a specific time for zoning, historical commission, all these commissions, when people appeal? And I mean, I hear that some groups have a year. They can hold up zoning, or they can hold up a process for a year. I wondered how that process goes, and is it true? Because we know now that groups are using that to delay the eventual decision with regard to what happens in developers and contractors.
So are we talking if there's a zoning appeal?
Yes.
So again, zoning is under the Department of Licenses and Inspection. So I think it depends. So I think the process to get to the zoning board is something that we're looking at and making sure that is being done in an efficient way. And it's my understanding that the new zoning board that's in place is working through these cases more quickly than had been in the past. But that being said, you know, when somebody is approved for a variance and somebody who feels that they're affected by that files an appeal, that really goes through the court system. And unfortunately, the city doesn't have a whole lot of involvement in that once it's into that court system. But I can say that the process from when, you know, the developer comes in and first shows us a project to the time when, if need be, they need to go to the zoning board of adjustment, we are looking at, you know, every step in there and seeing if that's the most efficient, as well as being mindful that we want to make sure that we're getting, you know, the various input into that project, you know, that we're hearing from the community, that what we're hearing from council, that we're hearing by the various parties that are affected by that development, to make sure it's getting through the process in an efficient way, but that we're also taking our time to make sure that we're considering all the various perspectives and how it applies within our codes and our plans.
Now, this also kind of emphasizes the importance of the zoning remapping program. You know, when the zoning code was rewritten back in 2011, one of the goals of the code was to reduce the number of properties that would have to go through the variance process. And we do have data showing that there has been a reduction in those cases, but, you know, as we're able to do corrective remapping throughout the city, as well as zoning to advance the district plans, we're hoping that cases that are refused and have to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment will continue to decline over time.
And does that refer to the Historical Commission, that statement, that response as well? I mean, we hear of people going to the Star Commission because it holds things up for a year. Is that true?
So I'm going to ask John Farnham to come up again, the Executive Director of the Historic Commission.
I'm
Thank
John
you.
Farnham, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Historical Commission.
Thanks. Would you pull your mic up?
I agree with you that it is possible to extend approval processes through the Historical Commission's process, but the Philadelphia Historical Commission is required by ordinance to reach
Can you
decisions.
talk louder? It's really hard to hear you.
Excuse me. The Philadelphia Historical Commission is required by ordinance to make decisions on applications within 60 days, and it almost always makes decisions within 30 days. When we see that process become very much elongated through appeals, the delays occur first with the Board of License and Inspection Review, a city appeals agency that hears appeal cases from various and sundry boards and commissions and departments. That board is, as its name would imply, under the auspices of the Department of Licenses and Inspections, and then appeals from that board to Court of Common Pleas and ultimately Commonwealth Court. So the Historical Commission itself is making its decisions very quickly. It's when those decisions are appealed that the appeal process can extend out months and even years.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Couple quick questions. I'm going to turn it over. I have one policy question for you, Ms. Fadullon, and then I got a couple of questions for planning. I'll just ask the questions. One, I'd like to get your perspective on inclusionary housing. Just generally, it's been tried. I tried it some years ago, couldn't quite get there. With respects to planning, in your earlier testimony, there was a reference to the racial demographic in the various departments, and planning was not even close to reflecting the population in the city of Philadelphia. Question 1A is, why do you think that is? And question 1B is, what, if any, steps will be taken to change that? And also, in the last administration, when there was the zoning code change, and a part of that, they did one thing that kind of I didn't agree with, actually related to inclusionary housing. That gave away all of the incentives that we would have given individuals if they did inclusionary housing for free, which I never understood that, but Mr. Greenberg at the time decided that that's what he wanted to do. But the author, as a part of that, they created the level of density in the city by allowing more density as it relates to projects, and particularly minimizing the number of parking spaces that were required per development. In a lot of neighborhoods, and I know Councilman Squilla can attest to this, in a lot of neighborhoods where there's new development, there is like no parking in the foreseeable future, but yet we continue to allow people to build and build and build. And it's like, it might be nice for the developer because he doesn't have to have that requirement, but even the people that ultimately buy the units are complaining, and Lord knows the people who live there are complaining. Is there any thought about us looking at that as a strategy? Because you guys are about planning, but it just seems like we're just kind of like letting this thing go, and it is a real problem. The density is just, it's unbearable.
Sure. Well, with regard to your first question, we're a civil service agency, so we're kind of captive to the civil service process. And I think the demographics of the staff kind of reflect the nature of students who are coming out of planning schools. We have, over the past several years, been able to hire a number of new staffers as positions have become vacant. One way in which we've made a lot of progress is that there are a lot more women being hired than men. In recent years. In terms of racial composition, we're not there yet. But what we do is we actively recruit among area universities and professional organizations and so forth and so on whenever the city offers a civil service exam for planning positions.
Okay.
So we're actively trying to recruit a very diverse workforce, and we're certainly aware that we need to do more, and we regard diversity as very important.
Okay, so in your recruitment, sometimes you may want to go a little further than that. So Cheney, Lincoln, there are a number of schools where there's a high population of African American, Latino, and other minorities. Are there conversations with those particular schools in terms of encouraging those opportunities where ultimately you
I'm not sure that we've reached out to those.
If we just do Penn and Temple.
Yeah, those are the two major schools with planning programs in the region. So
nobody else has that. I don't know. I'm asking these questions. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not aware that Lincoln, for example, has a planning program or a community development type of program. We can certainly investigate that and reach out to those schools.
Delaware State.
Yeah, in order to become a city planner, you don't necessarily need a planning degree. There's a variety of different kind of degrees that would qualify to take an exam. Geography, some of the social sciences, and so forth. So we can certainly reach out to some of those other schools.
Can you? I mean, can you talk to Mr. Atkinson? I mean, he's taking a global approach. Some of these things we have to work at. We can't just hope that it happens. Not suggesting that that's what you're doing, but I mean, sometimes we got to be a little more aggressive in our approach. The other issue,
with regard to your
parking issue.
Yeah, with regard to your question about parking. I mean, we certainly understand that that parking is an issue in a dense historic city that we have. There is value in density. And I think that one of the really attractive features of Philadelphia is the fact that we're not suburbia, and there are options.
Some people wouldn't say that was attractive. Some people.
Well, I mean, everybody.
There are actually sections in the city recently that we've developed areas that are not as dense that people find more attractive.
Right.
Particularly in the affordable housing.
And I think we believe that in order to be competitive, the city has to offer a variety of different kinds of housing types and in neighborhoods to be competitive, not only in our region, but across the United States and maybe even internationally.
So if we have 40,000 vacant lots in the city of Philadelphia, I don't get a sense that density is an issue. I mean, we have areas to build, so why do we keep encouraging people to build on top of houses, on top of houses, on top of neighborhoods, while in the earlier reference to Councilman Jones' question about people that are leaving the city from perimeter communities, i.e. our last redistricting, we found that it was a very significant exodus of individuals living in the northwest and the west, to the point where, we had to shift our entire council districts westward because of the loss of population.
Well,
so I'm saying, where is planning in this global picture as it relates to how we build our city?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to be able to offer a variety of housing types in a variety of different neighborhoods to be competitive.
You said that, but I'm saying that policy drives decisions sometimes. If you allow, if you say that you can build, and this goes to this whole tax abatement issue also, it's okay for you and we're going to encourage you, and we're going to give you incentives to continue to build in Center City in this close perimeter, then that's what people are going to do, right? There's like no incentive to go out in the neighborhoods, and policy has to encourage that. So if your position is that it doesn't matter how dense it gets in Center City and the perimeter neighborhoods, then it's okay, then why would, people...
Yeah, no, that really wasn't the point I'm trying to make. I think in certain historic areas of the city that are very densely built up, allowing density offers the opportunity to provide affordable housing. The more units that you can build on.
But how do you do that? Because we shot down the inclusionary housing model.
Well,
do you support that?
I personally would support an inclusionary zoning policy. The devil is in the details. Okay. One of the things that the new zoning code permits is a bonus to provide affordable housing. I think that's only been taken advantage of in one development.
Because Mr. Greenberger gave away all of those without requiring that to get the density. And that's the problem. If you had put those, and that's not your fault, don't get me wrong. If you had withheld all of those density credits and all the other things, the parking requirements, then developers would have figured out a way to have real opportunities for affordability in their development. But that's not the case now. So I just, fundamentally, I'm just concerned about the density, and I'm really concerned about the parking, which is a real issue. Well, I know everybody's not going to ride a bike. Right. Everybody's not going to get on public transportation. This is Philadelphia. People drive to the corner store.
Sure. That's
just what we do, right?
Yes.
Maybe.
Absolutely. I think though the point I was trying to make is that there are an increasing number of options for people to live in the city and not necessarily need to own a car. Bike share is one. Car sharing is a real opportunity that I think, in general, probably hasn't been taken.
I'm not riding a bike. I'm just telling you now.
Yeah, well, I don't either, except for recreation.
I'm not getting on the bike anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just sober, right? I mean, there are people who don't want to ride a bike. I don't think that the city should be in a position where say, well, you have to ride a bike. I mean, why? They don't want to ride a bike. Why can't they ride their car?
I mean, there have been other proposals in the past to do kind of community parking.
Where?
Off-street parking using vacant lots. Where a few years ago there was one in Manayunk. I don't think it ever went anywhere. There was a number of years ago in Old City, I think, a parking condominium that would allow people to park in a parking structure, to purchase a parking space in a parking structure so that they wouldn't necessarily be on the site where they live. Those kind of communal parking facilities, I don't think have really taken off, and I think part of that is due to the expectation of people that the city would provide those parking facilities for neighborhood residents. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I don't think that's necessarily something that we can do. It's certainly an idea worth investigating.
Okay, we're getting way. Councilman Jones has a point of order.
So you hit, as my colleague said, hit a nerve. In parts of East Falls, Manayunk, Roxborough, we have a dilemma where we're conflicted about building front-end parking, which might add more, but it takes away aesthetically from what traditional housing looks like.
And it takes away your curb space.
And it takes away curb space. We have another problem with a nurse coming home from a second shift, parking her car at 2 a.m. and walking 3 blocks to get to her house, not to mention seniors and others. So we have to have a serious study, dialogue about not just how we design parking and factor it in, like you're saying, Mr. President, but also diagonal parking on streets where we have that kind of density. That it's my understanding that if you, on wide enough streets, can park almost diagonally, you can add 33% more parking. So we have to have those serious discussions about that and where, because, you know, one man's prosperity is another person's sore feet because they can't park. The other thing is that on the communal parking, we might have to put in an ordinance where if a church that only really has parking needs on a Sunday decides to allow residents to park on their lot, that they get some kind of inducement, discount, something to encourage them and offset some of their insurance costs. Because, you know, there's a liability of someone being on their property. But we have to really look at this, because there are some neighborhoods, and they're not just wealthy neighborhoods, that are overgrown and overdeveloped to the point where parking is a problem. So we, in your planning, in our zoning, we need to kind of consider those things, because too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. So that has to be a part of your planning.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Councilman. I just want to follow up, because I can talk to you about this, because we seem to be at odds in terms of how much of this we allow, or even the approach. I represent Fishtown, Temple University, Northern Liberties, right, Fairmount, Spring Garden in my council district. That's all I hear is, Darryl, this is out of control. You can't park. And I got to respond to that. And sure, you as the planning department, I'm talking to you. And if the response to the constituents is, well, you know, go down there and rent one of those bikes, the bike share, people look at me like I'm crazy. I mean, so as we allow this to continue to flourish, I just think at some point it's the responsibility of the planning department to rethink this policy about allowing, what it used to be 1 for 1 at one point, one yes, parking space, off-street parking space per unit. Now it's correct, like, what, 1 to 4, 1 to 5?
Yeah, it's 3 per 10.
Yeah, they were saying people are not going to bring cars. I don't know where that came from.
Well, I mean, a bit of it is culture change. And I'm not saying that people have to, you know, should be required to give up their cars. Obviously, I'm not saying that, but you know, I think it's a balancing act between maintaining a good fabric of the city.
Yeah, but sir, all due
and
respect,
accommodating their needs.
You can have a philosophy, and you can have some theoretical approach. The reality is that these people that are moving in these neighborhoods have cars. Temple University said that none of these students are going to have cars. You go up there and ask the people who live in those neighborhoods if those students have cars. This is not reality based on what you're saying. I mean, you can talk about people changing their culture, but, you know, there are a bunch of developments that happened in my district. They built a development, and everybody in the development has a car. And it's a real problem.
Right. So
I won't believe it.
I think
We can
that's
talk
something
about
that we'll take under advisement, and we'll look at, because I do think it's a different answer depending on where you are. I mean, we do have some folks that have built these very high-density buildings with a lot of parking, and then their parking sits empty. Then we've had other people who've done a similar development, and they don't have enough parking. And then we've got some neighborhoods where, you know, we allowed those front-loaded garages, and unfortunately the street parking went away, and that was a problem in their neighborhoods. Other people need a parking space to go along with the unit. So I think we do have to rethink that and look at that and realize that, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And so we are taking a look at that. I know recently there was a planning study that came out around even just center city parking garages, and how where the use of those parking garages is actually migrating more to the neighborhoods because there's not parking available in neighborhoods. So I think we do need to take a closer look at that, and we'd be more than happy to work on that with you guys.
Okay, thank you. And if you can follow up on the inclusionary housing.
Inclusionary housing, so you and I know that we try to work on this in the past, and I think we've got to still figure out where that kind of sweet spot is, where we can include, you know, have a discussion about inclusionary housing in a way that doesn't necessarily have a negative impact on some of the development that's taking place, but think a little bit more creatively about some answers to make sure that it works.
Financially.
Yeah, the financial,
sure.
Right. And I think, you know, if we look at where it's been adopted other places, those, you oftentimes private developers are able to access public subsidy dollars to put those units in. I'm not necessarily sure that is what we have an appetite for here, but we can talk about it. We can talk about it, but I do think we need to start looking at some of those more creative models around how we do mixed income housing, because as we've heard, as our traditional resources dwindle, we have to be looking at and be willing to look at everything.
Okay. Point of order?
I would like to certainly agree with you. We can have meetings all over the city with the Planning Commission and other groups, but you'll generally find in some like-minded neighborhoods that you're going to get the same discussion. So if they go in your area and they say, well, we don't need this parking, and your people disagree with it, 9 times out of 10, when you come to mine, they're going to disagree with it too. Because parking is one of the worst issues we have in our entire city. I don't care where you go. I do not know why we changed the laws to not require parking. It's just ridiculous. And in the final analysis, that it's going to hurt development, not help it. Sure, some kids are University City, and I know I have all of that. They're happy to park, but that's not everybody, even in that community, because they don't live in every house on the block. It's just a very big issue, and thinking out of the box does not mean we should let parking go. Big problem. So I wanted to agree with the president on that issue before we move forward.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
And my apologies to my colleagues for taking such a long time, but it is really an issue every time I go to a community meeting, and I think Councilman Greenlee, who happens to also live in the 5th District, and attest to some of the areas that he's aware of. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Good morning, Council President.
Good afternoon, sir.
Just trying to add a little humor. So I think, the conversation around density is important. It's something that we need to, to continue to have as we move forward, because, there's a lot of ordinances and, public hearing conversations and discussions, around planning and zoning. And, things move fast here in the city, and how it all fits together, I think, is important to you guys. And I know you're aware of that. My colleague, Councilman Squilla, brought up industrial land. And, my question in regards to, having a property that needs to be rezoned residential, because the neighborhood may be, thriving, and more density is attractive, and more commerce and disposable income. My question is industrial land preservation. We did pass an ordinance last year or a year and a half ago, and it has to do with notification. All right, so is notification actually happening within the departments in the Planning Commission and at L&I over in Commerce?
So what you're referring to is an ordinance that says if you're looking to get a variance or rezone a parcel that's currently industrial and you want to put a different type of use other than industrial, the developer has to notify the Commerce Department. And a couple things around that. One is, in addition to the coordination of the various agencies that you see here, we also have coordination meetings with the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation and the Commerce Department to make sure that we're all on the same page and that notification is happening. Because oftentimes someone will come in and say, oh yeah, I talked to the Commerce Department, and then we'll go to the Commerce Department, did someone come in and talk to you? And maybe the communication has not been as it's been presented. Let's just put it that way. So we are working to ensure that communication happens. And then, for example, recently it was brought to our attention that the letter we sent out to the applicant that says you need to contact the Commerce Department didn't actually have any contact information. So we're taking steps such as that to make sure that communication happens. But then also we're taking steps with planning and the implementation to look at and making sure that we're not just approving a one-off residential, but what is going on in that area, what are the opportunities to maybe support industrial commercial development in a more proactive way, and to sort of make sure that just with one development, we're not sort of removing any of our other opportunities, that
I
we're
agree.
looking at it in a
And I hope that is a
holistic way.
priority when it comes to industrial land preservation. As we were, going through that process, some of the remapping and rezoning of these industrial buildings to residential, and some of them, are hugely successful. Others, when you have a sole independent residential use and it's in an area to other businesses that have been there first, I don't think it's the onerous and responsibility should be on the developer who's looking to reuse another parcel and not the existing industrial uses or business use that's in the neighborhood. Because what happens is you have a new development, right, that's put up for reuse because it's been a vacant building for some time, and we want to change it into residential. We want to put 60 units in there, 120 units, or whatever the number is, and you have the density issue. And the density issue not only becomes a burden on the residents themselves, but it becomes a burden on the existing buildings and business industrial use that is adjacent or nearby, and people are going to complain. And if we're going to take a look at planning in the future and coordination and I guess considering the density and the quality of life of the new residents, which is great. I think we should consider some sort of buffers that are on that new zoning site. So just something I'm going to throw out there for the future as opposed to...
And I think that's an excellent example of exactly why it was important for this office to get set up, is that we're now really tying those planning and implementation functions more closely together and using them to inform each other so that we are taking more of that holistic approach to these
Absolutely. I mean,
developments.
if that's actually happening, then that's the approach that we're going to have collaboratively with the new offices. I think that'll work out as long as the district council members are aware of what's happening in their district. Last question here, development services. One, what determines a project to be put in front of the development service team? Who are they? How is it selected? And how often do they meet?
Right.
And is there a backlog?
Okay, so there is no backlog, but development services, so was traditionally a trigger, and I'm not sure I have the triggers exactly right, but I think it was 50,000 square feet of development or more would sort of trigger.
Like CDR?
Yeah, that was just, and again, it's not a super formal, regulated process, but it was sort of this idea that if you had 50,000 square feet, and I think there was some other threshold that you sort of gained entree to the development services group. So the staff, we have John Monlack is our deputy director of that, and then there's two other staff people that work in that division, Meredith and Kevin Hart. But really, Development Services Committee is only brought together on an as-needed basis. So if there's a project of scale that is coming into the city or is being proposed, that Development Services Committee will be brought together based on the anticipated approval process that development will likely need to go through. So that would include, planning, streets department, L&I, PICO, maybe the school district, whoever is kind of going to be affected by that will come in together in a room. I think one of the things we're looking at is, and like we said, they deal with 10 cases a year, something like that. So they probably see about 10 cases a year, and that's really been for large-scale development. And now, again, with the reorganization of these offices, we're really looking to bring that on board whenever it's needed, not just because you need a threshold. Not necessarily, again, for someone who's going to, put a kitchen addition on their house or a roof deck, but if there's an affordable housing project and it's 10 units and it may not be 50,000 square feet, but those folks need the assistance of development services because there's an issue with the water department or an issue with L&I, we're looking to bring those services forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two pretty quick questions. The first one is in regards to applicants who are applying for variances and special exceptions. They are provided with like a list of addresses that they need to deliver notices to in regards to a zoning appeal. Is that correct? Yeah. Now, let me ask you, explain how the list of addresses is determined. And I'm looking at a sample one that was used for a meeting that we had. What is the criteria used? Because with the word that I heard from the RCO and community residents who attended the meeting was, we understand that this is the list, but why isn't the circumference a little larger? Tell me how that process took place and how the decision was made.
What you're referring to is the RCO notification process, and that is part of the zoning code, and the code. So that list of addresses that you're referring to is basically done by our staff. We're notified by L&I of a notification requirement. We then, our staff, City Planning Commission and our GIS staff then takes a look at the project site and using the guidelines contained in the zoning code develops that list of addresses. So I believe that it is all of the facing properties on the block.
Right, so it says every property on the same block as the applicant's property, every property on the block face across the street,
right,
and every property that is within 200 feet. And I guess I mentioned this to you today to say, one, we've heard from more than one RCO and non-RCO community-based organizations, particularly when they find out about an issue at the last minute because they weren't on the list of agencies or within the certain circumference to be notified, that is a challenge. And so I'm asking us to let's give some thought to that process, and that's why every constitution, every code, there's something we can make called amendments to it, because we constantly can work to improve it. So I just wanted to make sure I brought that to your attention. And then my final question is regarding OHCD, and I need to understand what rubric is it that you use to identify or label commercial corridors that are eligible for community development block grant funding. And this funding is used for SIP and commercial corridor cleaning grants. Let me give you an example. You can travel through Washington Lane and it's only one block, about 15 stores, right? It is eligible. You go 2 blocks over and you get to Vernon Road, which is near the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. It is not eligible for funding. And we're looking at the same subdivision because they are part of the same zip code and neighborhood. So explain why and what rubric is used to determine eligibility.
HUD defines low mod eligible census tracts, and they're very strict about that, right? While we look at an area in its entirety, our HUD monitors come and say, these 2 tracts, or if an address falls in it, are not eligible. So it's a HUD requirement for low and mod census tracts.
So with that in mind, obviously, again, since even prior to being elected to the state and coming to this body, I worked for 15 years here. And this has been the same issue for a very long time. The question that I've never asked before or heard a response to is, with HUD having such stringent sort of eligibility requirements as it relates to identifying low to mod census tracts, have we as a city ever engaged in a very aggressive effort to say to HUD specifically, look at the dynamics of what we're trying to improve here as it relates to our commercial corridors? Is there a way that we can modify? And so I guess what I'm saying is now, working using a collaborative approach with we, the legislative body, the executive branch, along with our congressional delegation, to maybe bring HUD into a room and talk with our regional director to figure out how we could even come up with some exceptions for the city of Philadelphia.
Right. I totally agree, and I think...
Yeah, so just coincidentally, on Friday, we are having a everybody get to know you meeting with HUD. To start to lay the table for not just figuring if we can move HUD off the dime, but again, seeing if there's other types of resources that we can leverage, saying, listen, we're putting our block grant dollars into this block of your commercial corridor. Unfortunately, you know, the weird census tract line is right here, and it subdivides your commercial corridor. So then, taking those dollars that we get from the government, can we leverage those with other dollars to make sure that we're treating the whole issue as opposed to just a piece of it?
Let me offer to lend my voice and do anything that
we will take
that
advantage of your voice anytime we can get it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council Chair Heenan. Question for you guys. I have two or three quickies. Why did this city, you mentioned they lost $45 million from the federal government in funding?
So I think those were federal, so the way the block grant dollars come to us is on a formula basis. So there had been kind of a tradition of us getting less dollars every year because we were losing population. And then a few years ago, you know, we were able to sort of reverse that formula, but at the federal level, the overall pocket has been diminishing, so then our piece of that, the pie has been getting smaller and smaller, so our piece of the pie then has been dwindling.
And there's nothing we can do to reverse that or prevent it?
Yeah, and that also includes a dramatic cut from the state. We used to get around $5 to $6 million for basic system repairs. So it's state and the federal government.
Right. So are we able to reverse that? You know, HUD is a very large federal government agency. It's difficult, sort of like moving a mountain. That doesn't mean that we're not going to try. Some of the things that we've talked about is maybe even working with our sister cities that may have a large, row house contingent of housing, and figuring out as a way for us to work together and maybe go to HUD with a pilot program that says if we need something to treat row houses, right? That isn't necessarily a problem that maybe Los Angeles has or San Francisco. Well, they have some row houses, but they seem to be able to take care of them. But this is a problem that, the Baltimore or Cleveland or Cincinnati or some of these other kind of places are experiencing along with us, and is there a way for us to come up with a pilot program that then we can make an economic argument about why it would make sense to invest in a program like that. So we are looking at those things again, as well as going to the philanthropic community, particularly the national foundations, and figuring out are there things that we can do in Philadelphia, because as we heard in the parking discussion, we've got one of just about everything here. So we are an excellent city for test cases and modeling.
Okay. The second question was, do we have any more capacity to grow this recent initiative associated with the landscape program where we hire jobs for returning citizens? Is there a capacity to expand on that program?
With funding,
That's what you said, if you have more
yes,
resources.
yes. I think last year, with the additional funding, our partners at the Horticultural Society launched what I think is, the pilot program. They've hired 27 returning citizens, I think, and we're able to add another 2,000 lots and expanded the community land care groups. Those are groups that are working within the community and providing jobs for community residents. So I think another thing that sets that program apart is that they're working with Philly Rise and the Enterprise Center to provide ongoing support to ensure that those returning citizens stay employed.
Okay, one last question. Councilman Squill, I thought, had a great idea last year, and very successful auction of, I think, like 100 properties, and it went pretty quickly. Is that a possible tool that you could utilize in the land bank to move the inventory quicker?
I think those are things that we can look at if that has councilmanic support and feel that that's a direction that like to move in, we can investigate it, sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you very much. As you know, during these times and with all the development that's going on, we have an issue with people being afraid of gentrification. I wanted your opinion on that, and if you all have some plans as to what we can do to let neighborhoods know that they are protected and that we're not, as a city, trying to make sure that they get pushed out of their homes.
Right, so I think that gets back to the discussion we've been having, somewhat about the land bank, but then also doing the strategic planning to determine where we have opportunities to either create or preserve affordable housing, where we have opportunities to do workforce housing, to make sure that we have a choice of things that, that there's a spectrum of housing choice, that it isn't just all this income or all that income. And that takes some time to do that in a strategic way. So oftentimes it means that we're not, putting land out for development, or we're not developing things as quickly as some people would like us to see, but like to see us do, but that's because we're taking our time to make sure it's being done in a strategic way where we are encouraging that growth and new investment, but we're also taking our time to protect the existing residents. And to be honest with you, as we all know, that's a hard issue. And we're working towards looking at where best practices are in place in other communities, and it's hard to find other best practices, to be honest with you, and so that's why we're taking a strategic look at where we're doing our investment and how these things are happening. And I think this idea of looking closely at where our population is moving and getting ahead of some of those things to figure out how we can proactively do development but protect the existing residents is something we're very interested in pursuing and figuring out over time, definitely.
Yeah, it's very important because some neighborhoods are low-income neighborhoods. They can't afford workforce housing. And in fact, I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with a developer who was saying he wanted to do workforce housing. And when I told him I needed low and moderate income housing in that area as well, he said, well, we don't build for free. We're not volunteers. We need to make money as well. So this whole issue of low and moderate income housing in areas and the whole issue of gentrification, even in areas, I have the Promise Zone. We got Mantua. It's a big, big thing in today's world. But I have to make sure that the people aren't pushed out because they can't afford even workforce level housing. They've been there, their parents have been there, their grandparents have been there, their great-grandparents have been there. And certainly they expect us to protect them as we move forward with trying to develop housing and as well as retail in those areas.
Right. And again, I think that really underscores our need to be creative and aggressive around preservation and how we keep people in those homes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I have a question before Councilman Green comes back. It's regarding land care. How are the 9,000 lots selected?
The land care program, I think it's important, it's a community development program. So the priorities are in and around where the city is investing in areas of priority. And those selections have been made since the start of the program back in 2008. And so we now have to date 9,000 lots that are being maintained throughout those communities.
how do you see it getting from 2,000 to 9,000 in 1 year?
What made that happen is the capacity of our partners at the Horticultural Society through the addition of funding, additional community land care organizations in the community, and also the willingness and participation of the contracted landscapers. There was a commitment and an enthusiasm to work together collaboratively to make this program work. So
the program is it's not a temporary use. It's in perpetuity, correct?
Exactly.
I mean, it's going to be every year.
And one thing to note too, I think, is that as it was originally conceived, not to be a long-term, the idea was to improve the lots, to improve the quality of life for the surrounding residents, and that also to be used for future development. So I think since the beginning, roughly 10 to 15% of the lots that are cleaned are then eventually developed.
Okay, so that leads me to my last question on that. Will the land bank be used to bring in the delinquent parcels where land care is already active?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? So that, are you asking?
Will land bank ultimately be the one to bring in the delinquent vacant land to be reused for your purposes, well, for the land care and to put to market?
Not necessarily for the land care, but as the properties are being brought in, several of those properties are currently being maintained.
Through the land care program.
Through the land care program.
Through the land care. So the land bank, through its process and its delinquency of the vacant parcels, a portion of those will be intended to go to market. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you. Councilman Heenan, serving as temporary chair. I just want to follow up on some of the questions that Councilwoman Parker raised in reference to the challenges that she described in reference to providing resources for parts of the 9th Council District, which we've also seen in other parts of the city, especially during my tenure working with Councilman Tasco. Can you provide some information regarding areas in the city where CDBG dollars have been spent that have been used for the prevention or elimination of slums or blight under the HUD guidelines that were not based on income restrictions?
That we have.
Oh,
yeah. Through the years, I don't believe that we have used, that is a little more difficult of a classification to use funding under the blight slum elimination. I can go back and provide you and look for that information when we have used that. I don't have it readily.
But generally, as long as an area is determined as blighted, then CDBG dollars can be used for an activity in that area to prevent or eliminate, regardless of income guidelines.
Yes, and again, I would have to go back and look when we've used that classification.
So if an area of the city does have a blight certification, then income should not be determined in reference to whether CDBG dollars can be used, correct?
And also, that we have a local requirement that those dollars be used to serve neighborhoods that are 80, and residents that are 80% and below median income.
Right, so on top of the federal regulations from HUD, there was also an ordinance passed, I think, almost as soon as the city started to get CDBG funds locally, that there's a requirement that they be spent in areas with median income 80% or below.
Right. So it's more the local requirement that may be more of the challenge than the federal guidelines.
Yep.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you for your time and your panel here.